Okay, now this is going to be a little bit different than the previous screens because I'm in a different classroom, in a different environment, and here I am. But I have to have the lights off up front so we can go ahead and actually see the presentation. So we'll be going a little bit from this, and then when I have to write on the board, I'll go ahead and turn the lights on and we'll work this. So it'll kind of work a little bit different, but here's where we're going. All right, we're going to be talking about fiscal policy. All right, fiscal policy means, yes, we're talking about the government in our circular flow diagram. And remember, you should have this in front of you already so we can go ahead and get started. All right, so we've got our concept of it. Remember, when we're looking at government in capitalism, the 6 characteristics, government's the last one at the bottom here. The legal mechanism, make sure we protect all of these others, from going ahead and being infringed upon, making sure that they work. And remember, we do have 3 parts of government. Congress passes the laws, the president enforces the laws, and if these 2 or we the people have a problem, that's where the court system comes in and goes ahead and resolves those problems. So when we're looking at what we're going to do, we're not going to be talking about the Supreme Court. We're not going to be talking about the Federal Reserve. In fiscal policy, we're talking about the Congress, House and the Senate, and the President, because they're the ones that go ahead and pass the laws that make our economy work. All right? And remember, when they pass laws, we're talking about like this. Senate's on the top, House is on the bottom, and they all have to agree. Here's their conference committee where they iron everything out, and then it goes to the President. So this is what we're looking at. Now, changed a little bit here just in case you forgot. Prior to the class lectures, there's a set of handouts that you need to print out. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be going to those handouts as we go through the lecture. So the first one I want you to do is I want you to get the problems and concerns note sheet, the one that looks kind of like this behind all that. You got that little U.S. debt thing here down at the bottom. So you want to get that one out because we're going to start working on this one, okay? Now, again, we talked about the functions of government, and what we're looking at here is, a little bit trigger happy here today. Stabilize the economy, maintaining competition, redistributing income. This is everything that the government's supposed to be doing right here. And they do it through a certain framework. And this is where we're going to start looking at fiscal policy and the function of government. So put that one handout aside for a little bit and get this one out. It should say fiscal policy note sheet. And again, that's in the FP module. So let's take a look at the top part. When we're looking at the top, fiscal policy is the function of government, and they stabilize the economy through changes in a couple of things. The first is with taxes, okay? They can nudge us and stabilize the economy as they go ahead and decide what taxes they want to put on. Now, remember, taxes, households pay them, businesses pay them. But like we said before, businesses in the end never ever really pay any taxes. Households end up paying every tax that comes along the way that the government wants to do. So we may think, oh yeah, let's tax the corporations and everything else, but in the end, we end up paying those taxes. So, how does the government get our money? Because remember, this is the money to do things that we want them to do, because that's how we elected them to office. Well, give you a little diagram here. At the federal level, Washington, D.C., 45% of the taxes come from the income tax. Right? That's the thing we have to send every April 15th, except for the coronavirus year, they've extended that for us. But 45% of all money going to the federal government comes from the income tax. The payroll tax is where another 35% comes from. And then we have corporate taxes. Oop, wait a minute, corporate. No, that's a business tax. That means households are still paying that. Excise tax, that's the tax on the rich folks. And then we have the other down at the bottom. Now, at the state level, right, so here we're looking at Tallahassee here in Florida, they have a sales and an excise tax. 49% of income generally across the country comes from state and excise taxes. Now, 32% of state taxes are income tax. Well, there's a lot of states that don't have one of those. Now, Florida is one of them, and we do not pay any income taxes whatsoever because we have a little critter with big ears in the middle of the state. We got Mickey Mouse and all kinds of tourism that comes with it. That's why we don't pay income tax, but we definitely pay licenses and others. With all of our income that we get from tourists that come in, I mean, think about it. Let's go ahead and let people from all over the world pay our income tax instead of us. And that's just the way it happens to work here in Florida. Corporate tax, up, but again, that's business tax, so people pay it. Property tax, people pay that. And then, of course, the death and gift tax. At the local level, this would be, like Jacksonville or, your main cities and stuff like that. 75% of the income they get come from property tax. Now, you'll never hear anybody say the property tax is, because if they did that and voters realized that we were paying 75% of that tax, we might get kind of upset. So what they call it is they call it a millage rate. And it's, 0.0845, whatever, it's kind of like 6 or 7 digits long, starting with a decimal point. So it doesn't look like it's all that much. But it turns out 75%. When you talk about a town having $1 billion budget, well, 75% of that billion came from property taxes. And of course, we got sales and excise tax, personal and corporate tax. Again, remember, corporate, that's business, so they don't actually end up paying it. And then, of course, we've got the other. So that's how the government gets our money. Now, we have this thing of who pays income tax. We think that, the 1%, the 99%, and all that kind of stuff. Well, let's actually see what happens here. First off, the poor should be having some kind of a minimum wage to go ahead and be able to live. Well, first off, let's knock this out right now. And we'll talk more about this actually later in the class. We've got a paper coming up on it. But minimum wage is nothing more than the wage that an entry-level worker should be getting. The entry-level worker. Not middle-aged, not 50, 60, but we're talking about the 16 to 22-year-olds. That's where minimum wage starts. It was never meant to be a living wage. The idea behind the minimum wage is as you get better at your job, you get raises, you get promotions, or you move to other jobs which go ahead and will give you a higher salary. That's what the minimum wage was for. And the reason that they put the minimum wage in effect is because at one time, let's say you wanted to be an electrician. Well, to be an electrician, you have to be a journeyman. And to be that, you actually have to go ahead and get experience. So what they would do is they would take on people, say, yeah, we'll give you experience, you'll be my gopher running around and getting everything, but I'm paying you for you to get the experience. I'm not paying you money. So that's why they came up with the minimum wage. It says, hey, that's not exactly fair. You got to pay them something, but we realize that they're not real experienced workers. So you don't have to go ahead and pay them market wages. You pay them a minimum wage. Yeah, market wages, minimum wage. In other words, the government's interfering with the invisible hand when it comes to wages. But what we're looking at is they break income down into 5 parts. They call them quintiles. Okay? And what they basically do is they break up income in the United States in 5 different parts. So let's just You know, say we've got 300 million people in the US, well, we would divide that by 5. So in other words, the first 60 million would be in the lowest quintile, then the next 60 million, and the next 60 million, and the next 60 million, and the next 60 million. And this one over here would also have the 1% in it, okay? This is the rich, or in other words, you go, as you can see, we've got lowest to highest, and we would have, oops, boy, this thing's getting tricky here. We've got poor, lower middle class, upper middle class, and rich. Just starting out, you're poor. Your first real job, now you're in the lower middle class. Career position, that's where you get in the middle class. You've gone through this. And then now you're set in your career, you're getting into higher management, that kind of stuff, or now you've owned your business for 10, 15, 20 years, you're now in the upper middle class. And then you get to the rich category. High school, college, you're just graduating. First real job, real good paycheck, great paycheck, and then rich. That's kind of how this works its way through. As you see, it's a progression. And so when we talk about progression, we're looking at this is how your lifetime should work. But remember back in one of the previous chapters we talked about choices, you know, our first chapter. Sometimes we make good choices, sometimes we make bad. We make good choices, we go this way. We make bad choices, we might go backwards. And hopefully we make good choices and come forward again. On the other side of the coin, people may make choices that affect us. You know, like our boss goes ahead and makes a decision, and you may be the best worker, not only in that company, but the whole industry, and you happen to work for this boss. But the decision the boss makes bankrupts the company. So through no fault of your own, all of a sudden you're here, and now you're heading back that way. So this isn't a everybody does this, and everybody does it at the same time, kind of like it looks like here. Right? That doesn't necessarily happen because of choices. So we bounce back and forth, and it happens all the time. It's normal. But now let's take a look at who pays federal income taxes. First off, you'll notice that, and I believe this is year 2015, because I had some problems getting some graphs. But in that particular year, the rich, in other words, the top 1/5 of all wage earners, paid $50,000 in taxes that year. You go, well, $50,000 is not that much. Of course, you know, you multiply it by 10, 20, or 30 million, that gets to be a lot of money. Upper middle class, only $6,200. Now take a look at the difference between those two. Middle class, take a look at the difference between those two. And here's something that nobody really tells you. Lower middle class and poor, not only do they not pay income tax, but they go ahead and get money back from the government. You may have heard of something called the Earned Income Tax Credit. That's one of the ways that that happens. So almost half of the people in the country don't pay any income taxes whatsoever. So you start scratching your head and you go, well, wait a minute, that doesn't seem fair. But everybody's saying the rich have to pay more. Now when you hear that, what I want you to think is, have you ever heard somebody say the rich has to pay this much, you know, 60%, 70%, 80% of all their income? Nobody really tells you that number, and you'll hear some people in Congress say that. I mean, I know Nancy Pelosi, she's the head of the Democrats in Congress. She's I guess the most powerful ranking Democrat. And she says, oh yeah, the rich should be paying 70, 80, 90%. Well, she's rich. And if you look at her tax returns, she does not pay anywhere near that amount of money. So you need to go ahead and ask people, well, you know, you tell me to do this, why aren't you doing it? So that's always a question you should think about. Now, who paid taxes? Yeah, it was in 2015. 86% came from the rich. Almost 13% from the upper middle class, little over 4% from the middle class, and lower and poor didn't pay anything. They got money back. So that's how that happened. So we look at this and we go, wow, these folks pay the taxes. Now, who gets the percentage of money from taxes paid? Well, wait a minute, the poor come up with $18.20, the lower middle class, $4.91, and then the middle class, they get some. Even the upper class and even the rich, $0.19 per tax paid, they get money back. All right? Now this has to do with our tax plan, right? Our big old tax law, which again, Congress passed the law. If they don't like it, fix it. But here we've got who pays, and here we got who gets. So let's take a look and look at 5 particular questions on this. Question number 1, is it fair for the rich to pay this amount, for the upper middle class to pay this amount, for the middle class to pay this amount? And statistically speaking, and this is kind of one of those rule of thumb things, that means it's kind of maybe true. It's not something that you're going to go ahead and bet the farm on, but it's close enough. Remember, horseshoes, hand grenades, and nuclear weapons, getting it in the ballpark. That's macroeconomics, and that's where kind of rules of thumb come from. And 80% of the people taking this class will be in the upper middle class by the time they retire. Some of you will be rich. Some of you will be in one of the other 3 categories. But 80% will be in the upper middle class. Now think about that. How much taxes should you pay so you can tell you're putting all the effort to go ahead and go from nothing to getting your degree to having all kinds of options and working for the rest of your life to get to this position? Is it fair to you that you should be paying taxes and other people don't? Okay, that's just a question. Question 2. Should the poor and the lower middle class get most of the money from taxes? Now you start scratching your head and you go, well, wait a minute. Is this fair? Not only are they not paying taxes, but they're getting money back. So you scratch your head and again, is that fair? Now, we work with incentives, okay? Our incentive to get up to here is, hey, the more money we make, the more opportunities that money gives us to do things with. So we're looking to make more money, even if we're paying more taxes. And we'll actually talk about making money and taxes, and if the taxes are too high, some people quit a little bit later. But there's the incentive to do that, but it's kind of a disincentive to keep paying more taxes. Now here's the other part. For the lower 2 categories, what's the incentive to make more money if the more money you make, the less you get from Uncle Sam? Right? That's number 3. Question number 4, we go ahead and we talk about tax cuts. And we hear certain people in Congress yelling and screaming, and certain people on the news yelling and screaming about, oh, the rich are getting the tax cuts. The poor aren't getting any tax cuts whatsoever. Well, here's what you need to remember. These are the folks paying the taxes. Any tax break, the folks that are paying 86.8% of the taxes are going to get most of the tax breaks. And if you look at the poor and the lower middle class, or over 40% of our population in the country, if they're not paying any taxes to start with, how can they get a tax cut? To get a tax cut means you actually have to pay taxes. So these are the folks that are getting the tax cut because they are paying taxes. They're not paying any taxes. So by definition, they're never going to get a tax cut. until they get into this area. Which, remember, going to college, that's where you're going. You're trying to get into that category. And then, of course, number 5 is always, what is the richest fair share of taxes? You know, I remember Denzel Washington was in France, and he was getting interviewed one time. And somehow or other, the interview got to how the French are paying more taxes so that everybody can go ahead and have the good things in life. And Denzel went ahead and said, yep, I agree with that. That sounds good to me. And then the reporter says, then you have no problem paying 75% of the money you get from your next film in taxes. And literally, he went, what? Okay? Not knowing what was actually going on. Now, we have a lot of our entertainment industry, and those folks think that because they're entertainers, that they know everything. So their word is law, and you'll hear them out there on Twitter, and the internet, on TV, whatever it is, giving their 2 cents, but not actually knowing what they're talking about. So again, entertainers aren't experts on the economy. So when you go ahead and hear entertainers flapping their gums about the economy, you might want to go ahead and think about, where did they get that information from? Where is their critical thinking to make that happen? Now, if they're going to tell you how to shoot a film and how to act and stuff like that, I'd be listening to 100%, especially the ones that are making a lot of money, because they are the experts. So this is what we're looking at. All right. So we got the quintiles, and I always get this question, well, how much money does that actually mean? Well, back in 2017, and these are 2017 numbers down the bottom, the last category was 0 to 22,800. Then it was 22,800 to 43,500, then it was 43,500 to 72,000, then it's 72,000 to 112,000. Then, of course, 112,000 and up, you are rich. There's going to be some people that are going, well, wait a minute, my mom and dad together make that amount of money. They don't think they're rich. Well, there you go. There gets to be some problems there. So here's what we got. But now this table over here, now you can't read it too much, but basically what it says is, this is age limits down here. Starting at 25. Now why 25? Because that's normally the first year college graduates are out of college. All right, that's kind of where they put that in. Yeah, I know most people graduate somewhere between 22 and 24. So they came up, they started the category of 25. Then you got 39 to, or let me see, 30 to 34, 35 to 39, 40 to 44, and so forth all the way up here to 60 to 64, which means you're getting ready to retire. And these are the different education levels. Because people always go, well, does education really get me money? Well, education / training and experience can do that. So let's just go ahead and start with this third line right here, okay? That's a high school graduate. They go ahead and they will start out making, on an average, just under 30,000, and by the time they retire, they may be up to like 35, maybe 40,000. 4-year degree, a bachelor's degree. Starts off, when you graduate, you're starting at 45, and you're going to be somewhere over 60 by the time you retire. Now, you want to go higher up for a master's degree, you start a little bit higher, and you end a little bit higher. Then you have a doctorate degree, a PhD, and then professional degrees like doctors and lawyers and stuff like that. So all this shows you is the more education you get, on average, the more money you're going to make. Again, more money, but it depends on choices. That's why it's an average. Some people with a high school diploma are going to end up being really wealthy because they decided to become a plumber. And we look at it and say, well, plumbers aren't all that, interesting of a job. But on the other side of the coin, they're making $90 to $100 an hour. So you start taking a look at all of that, And as they gain experience and as they can go ahead and do more difficult jobs, they can go ahead and open their own plumbing companies, because all you need is your license to do that. And they can all of a sudden get way above this average of the high school graduate. But then there's the high school graduate that does nothing but work at McDonald's and doesn't look at becoming a manager of a McDonald's. Because a manager at a McDonald's actually makes somewhere between high 5 and sometimes low 6-figure salaries, depending with all bonuses and everything else. Now the manager makes that. The burger flipper and the fryer, they may only be making minimum wage or a little bit more. But this is the average. So as you can see, on average, the higher education you have, the more opportunity to making more money is there. Now, the other part is you may start out, you got your first job, you're doing well, you're making 40 grand, you're in the lower middle class. You start getting up in the years, you're getting more education, more experience, you're getting raises, bonuses, and promotions. And then you get married. Wow, look at that. Now you're, if both of you, because professionals normally marry professionals, now you're rich, okay, together. So this is where we start taking a look at some of that stuff and work around with it. Now let's get back to our sheet, okay? The other way government does it is by spending money. All right, this is another way that they nudge us to do things that the government wants us to do. They nudge us by taxing, they nudge us by spending. Remember, transfer payments, buying resources, buying production, government spending. That's what we're looking at. Now, where does government spending come from right now? Well, at the federal level, and this was 2018, 38% went to pension and income security, Social Security, Medicare, right? Medicaid, because that's a state program. Of course, the government provides some of that Medicaid money, but mostly it comes from the states. Now, the thing about it is all that stuff in red, the Constitution doesn't say anything about the government having to pay. This is the first thing the government has to pay. 15% they pay for national defense. Then, there's the debt on that interest. We've got $22 trillion in debt. Well, like you have a loan, that $22 trillion is a loan from all kinds of folks, and the government has to pay interest. So 8% of that, say, $4 trillion revenue the government's getting from all that taxes, payroll tax, income tax, that stuff, 8% of that's just going to pay the debt. Everything else, all the other functions of government, 16%. At the state level, yep, we got public welfare, health and hospitals, so that kind of comes into play here. Education's a big one. Highways, they got some. The local level, most of it goes into education, but we still have some health, welfare, and the assisting with the poor and housing and sewage projects and stuff for that. Now, the legislative mandate that started this whole thing happened in 1946. And the reason it happened in 46 is the government was having some problems with what was going on in our economy. As a matter of fact, let's see. There we go. Okay. What was going on is we had, in 1929, we had something called a recession. Boom, the economy went down, right? At that point, somewhere around 1933, 32, 33, that time frame, we kind of bottomed out. We were at the trough of our business cycle during the Great Depression. And then we started heading back up, and December 5, 1941, our economy hadn't even got back to where we were in 1929 before the crash happened. Then, of course, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, okay? And government spending took off. I mean, it went way up. up until August of 1945. Germany had surrendered in April, Japan surrendered in August. We didn't need all those bullets, bombs, tanks, and airplanes that the government had been paying for during this period right here. So all of a sudden, we started seeing GDP go down like this. Now here is what was going on in 45, 46. A lot of those folks that were in Congress right here. And they were going, oh my God, we're going back into the Depression. So the government said we had to go ahead and get involved. Because if we don't, we're going to go back into the Depression because we can see it. We're already heading down. Now here's what was actually happening. Okay? Right here, during this time frame, Ford Motor Company, we'll just take one company for the example. They were making cars. Right? They were making cars all the way up to right about here when the government said, we need you to make tanks, jeeps, half-tracks, trucks, and all that kind of stuff. So they retooled their production facility. In other words, you can't go ahead and take a car line and all of a sudden make a tank out of it. You've got to change it all around, you've got to get all new equipment, and all of the suppliers that they're using to put that tank together. The suppliers have to go ahead and redo everything they're doing so we can go ahead and start building our tanks, planes, bombs, and everything else. All of a sudden we don't need them anymore. Guess what Boeing's doing? They're going back and retooling their plant. So if they're retooling their plant and all of the suppliers are doing the same thing, they don't have anything to sell. People aren't buying. We're not spending. Our circular flow economy that had been doing this, all of a sudden now starts doing this, and everybody gets scared because they think we're going back here. But what happened is once we retooled, we took off again, and that was one of the few periods in history where you could actually say, if we build it, they will come and buy it. They meaning anybody that had money. Because Europe basically was totally destroyed. Okay? There was, the economies of Europe were destroyed. The economies in Asia were destroyed. The only real economy that was intact was the United States. People couldn't wait for something to come out of the United States to go ahead and buy it. So that's where we went ahead and took off from there. So anyway, when they decided to pass this Employment Act in 1946, it was to do three things. It was to promote maximum employment, not of just labor, but employing all of our resources. Maximum production, all right?